To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Ghost Call. Matthew Dudley sat in his home office, reviewing architectural blueprints for the downtown renovation project that had consumed the last 8 months of his life. At 42, he'd rebuilt himself from the ground up after Leanne's death, climbing from junior architect to partner at Morrison & Associates, buying the house he'd always wanted, learning to exist in a world without her laugh echoing through the rooms. The call came at 9:47 p.m. Mr. Dudley? This is Officer Dale Cummings with Metro PD. I'm calling about a serious car accident on Highway 63. Your wife is in critical condition at County General. You need to come immediately. Matthew's hand tightened around his phone. Officer, there's been a mistake. My wife passed away 10 years ago. A pause. Papers rustling. Sir, the woman has your name and number listed as her emergency contact. She's been asking for Matthew Dudley. She's in bad shape. The doctors say the next few hours are critical. What's her name? Leanne Dudley. Sir, I understand this is confusing, but if there's any chance you know this woman, she needs you right now. Room 302, ICU. The phone nearly slipped from Matthew's grip. His pulse hammered in his ears as fragments of memories crashed through his mind. Leanne's funeral, the closed casket, the fire that had consumed their old apartment, the dental records that confirmed her identity. 20 minutes later, Matthew pushed through the automatic doors of County General, his mind operating on 2 tracks: the emotional chaos of impossible hope and the cold, analytical part of his brain that knew something was very wrong. That analytical side had saved him before, pulled him through the darkness after Leanne's death when grief threatened to destroy him. He'd learned to trust it. The ICU nurse led him down sterile corridors, her rubber shoes squeaking against linoleum. She's been in and out of consciousness. The accident was severe, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. We've stabilized her, but the next 24 hours are critical. Matthew's training as an architect had taught him to see structures, to understand how things were built and how they could fall apart. Right now, his entire reality was collapsing, and he needed to find the flaw in the foundation. Room 302. The nurse stepped aside. The woman in the bed was connected to machines that beeped rhythmically, her face partially obscured by bandages and bruising. But Matthew saw enough. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her nose, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe. It was Leanne, not someone who looked like her, not a stranger with a similar face. His wife, 10 years dead, lying in a hospital bed, very much alive. Matthew. Her voice was weak, crackling through damaged lungs. Her eyes fluttered open, focused on him with desperate recognition. Matthew, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The analytical part of his brain took over, shutting down the emotional flood before it could drown him. He approached the bed slowly, his face carefully neutral, every instinct screaming that this was a trap, a game, something calculated. Who else knows you're here? His voice was steady, cold. Confusion flickered across her battered face. What? Who else knows you're alive? Who was in the car with you? Matthew, please, I know you're angry. Who else knows? Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the blood and iodine. Dominic Schaefer. He was driving. He ran. Matthew, there's so much I need to tell you. Dominic Schaefer. Matthew pulled out his phone, opened a note, typed the name. His hands were rock steady. Your lover? The question landed like a physical blow. Leanne's expression crumbled, which told him everything. It wasn't like that. Matthew, I was in trouble. Real trouble. Dom helped me, but it all went wrong, and I couldn't come back, and then too much time passed. Stop. Matthew held up his hand. I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them honestly. Because right now, the only reason I'm standing here instead of walking out that door forever is that I need to understand what happened. And Leanne. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. If you lie to me even once, I'm gone. And I'll make sure whatever you're hiding stays buried. The coldness in his tone seemed to shock her more than any anger could have. This wasn't the Matthew she'd left behind, the gentle, trusting man she'd married. This was someone who'd been forged in the fire of her betrayal and come out stronger. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll tell you everything. Chapter 2. The architecture of betrayal. Matthew pulled a chair to Leanne's bedside, close enough to hear her labored breathing, but far enough to maintain emotional distance. His mind was already cataloging details. The expensive jewelry on her bruised wrists, the designer hospital gown someone had brought her, the faint tan line on her ring finger where his wedding band used to sit. Start from the beginning, he said. The real beginning. Leanne's eyes drifted to the ceiling, as if the words were written there. I met Dominic Schaefer 6 months before the fire. He was a client at the insurance firm where I worked. Wealthy, charming, everything I thought I wanted. She paused, wincing. Everything I convinced myself you weren't. Matthew felt nothing. The revelation should have carved him open, but he'd already processed it the moment she said Dominic's name. He convinced me we could start over together. New identities, new life. But we needed money. Serious money. The kind you get from life insurance policies and joint accounts drained systematically over months. So you faked your death. Matthew's voice remained clinical. The apartment fire. Dom knew people. He had connections, someone who could create a body, dental records that would match. We made it look like I was home alone when the gas line exploded. You were at that conference in Chicago. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. I told you about 3 months in advance, Matthew said. You planned this around my schedule. Shame flickered across her face. Yes. The insurance payout was $750,000. My inheritance from my father, $200,000. Our joint savings, $85,000. Over $1 million total. Matthew recited the numbers from memory, figures he'd obsessed over in the dark months after her death, wondering how he'd ever move forward financially. Where did it go? Dom had investments, business ventures. He said we'd triple it within 5 years, live like royalty in the Caribbean. Her laugh was bitter, painful. He went through it in 18 months. Bad deals, gambling, women. By year 3, we were broke and hiding from people Dom owed money to. Bad people. The kind who don't forget debts. Matthew leaned back, processing. So you've been living in poverty while I rebuilt my life from nothing. While I worked 80-hour weeks to pay off your funeral expenses and the mortgage on an apartment that burned down. Matthew, I'm not done. His eyes locked onto hers, and she fell silent. You're driving on Highway 63. That's 3 states away from here. Why were you coming back? Leanne's breathing quickened, the monitors beeping faster. Dom has a plan. He always has a plan. He found out you're successful now, that you're partner at Morrison and Associates. He researched you, Matthew. He knows everything about your life. Ice flooded Matthew's veins. What kind of plan? He wants to blackmail you. He kept evidence, emails, photos, financial records showing my involvement in draining our accounts. He even has the police report from the fire investigation with notations that could be interpreted as suspicious. If that comes out, if anyone starts investigating, it would destroy you. Your career, your reputation. He wants $500,000 to keep quiet. The pieces clicked into place in Matthew's mind, the architecture of their betrayal becoming clear. But there was something else, something Leanne wasn't saying. He could see it in the way her eyes darted away from his. That's not the whole truth. If you were just coming here to blackmail me, Dom wouldn't have run from the accident. He'd have stayed to ensure his leverage was secure. Leanne's face crumpled. Fresh tears carved paths through the dried blood on her cheeks. There's more. Dom didn't just do this to me. To us. He has a pattern. I found his laptop 3 weeks ago, files on 7 other couples. 7 other women he convinced to fake their deaths. 7 other men he destroyed and then bled dry afterward. One of them, the husband, he killed himself when Dom threatened to expose him. Matthew stood abruptly, walking to the window. The city sprawled below him, lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. Behind him, Leanne continued. I tried to copy the files, to gather evidence. But Dom caught me. That's when he decided we needed to move forward with you. His biggest score yet. But I couldn't do it, Matthew. I couldn't watch him destroy another person. So I took his laptop, tried to run. He chased me. That's how the accident happened. Where's the laptop? My bag. The police should have it in property storage. But Matthew, you have to understand. Dom has copies. He's paranoid, meticulous. The crash won't stop him. He'll come for you anyway. Matthew turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. How long was I supposed to grieve before you two came calling? How long did you give me to rebuild before you tore it all down again? I don't know. I swear I didn't want. You didn't want, Matthew interrupted softly. But you did it anyway. You chose this. Every single day for 10 years. You chose to let me think you were dead. You chose to let me blame myself, wondering if I'd missed some warning sign, if I could have saved you from that fire. You chose to let me stand at an empty grave and say goodbye to a ghost while you were living it up in the Caribbean. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll need to see that laptop. And I need you to tell me everything about Dominic Schaefer, where he lives, who his associates are, how he operates. Every detail. You're going to help me? Hope cracked through her voice. Matthew looked back at her, and his smile was cold enough to frost the windows. No, Leanne. I'm going to help myself. You stopped being my wife the moment you struck that match. Now you're just a source of information. He pulled out his phone and called the one person he knew would answer at midnight without questions. Owen, it's Matthew. I need your help with something. Something big and probably illegal. Are you in? Chapter 3, The Blueprint. Owen Casey arrived at Matthew's house at 1:30 a.m., carrying his laptop bag and wearing the same expression he'd worn when Matthew called him at 2 a.m. 10 years ago, devastated by news of Leanne's death. Owen was more than a friend. He was the brother Matthew never had, the man who dragged him out of the bottle and back into the world of the living. But where Owen had seen grief before, now he saw calculation. Talk to me, Owen said, setting up at Matthew's dining table without preamble. As a cybersecurity consultant, Owen had access to databases and information networks most people didn't know existed. He'd used those skills to help Matthew verify Leanne's death, to get answers when the police investigation seemed too quick, too clean. Now, Matthew realized, Owen's skills would serve a different purpose. Matthew laid it out clinically. The call, the hospital, Leanne alive, Dominic Schaefer's pattern, the laptop with evidence of multiple victims. Owen's expression shifted from shock to cold anger as the story unfolded. That son of a bitch, Owen breathed. And she went along with it. For 10 years. She did. Matthew pulled up the notes on his phone. But now she's scared, injured, and Dom abandoned her. She's willing to talk to save herself. I recorded everything on my phone. He held up his device. I need you to help me understand what we're dealing with. And then I need you to help me destroy him. Owen's fingers were already flying across his keyboard. Dominic Schaefer. Let me see what the internet knows about this bastard. While Owen worked, Matthew paced, his architectural training kicking in as he mentally constructed his approach. In architecture, you had to understand every element of a structure, the foundation, the supports, the weak points. Dominic Schaefer was a structure, and Matthew intended to find every crack, every vulnerability, and bring the whole thing crashing down. Got him, Owen announced. Dominic Schaefer, age 47. Multiple businesses, an import company, a consulting firm, both registered in Delaware. Messy divorce 5 years ago. His ex-wife claimed he was abusive and threatened her, but charges were dropped. He's got properties in Miami, Las Vegas, and right here in town, a penthouse in the Riverside Towers development. The Riverside Towers? Matthew stopped pacing. That's our project. Morrison and Associates designed that building. I know every inch of that structure. Owen looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. Now that's what I call home court advantage. For the next 3 hours, they worked. Owen hacked into hospital records to secure Leanne's laptop before Dominic could retrieve it. He cloned the hard drive, creating multiple backup copies and uploading them to secured servers. Matthew reviewed the files with cold precision, cataloging Dominic's victims, 7 couples, 7 devastated men, millions of dollars stolen. Look at this, Owen said, pointing to a folder labeled Insurance Protocols. He's got templates, step-by-step instructions for faking deaths. He's refined this into a science. There are notes about which fire departments ask fewer questions, which coroners can be bribed, which states have lax death certificate requirements. Matthew felt sick, but he kept his focus. Print everything. We need physical backups in addition to digital. And I need detailed backgrounds on each victim. One file, however, stood out. Project Dudley contained everything Dominic had researched about Matthew. His promotion to partner, his net worth, his daily routines, even surveillance photos taken over the past 2 months. There were notes in Dominic's handwriting. Subject trusts easily. Still wears wedding ring. Guilt complex makes him vulnerable. Estimated extraction, $500,000 initial, Potential for ongoing payments through controlled exposure. He's been watching you, Owen said quietly, planning this for months. Matthew's jaw tightened. Then he knows my patterns, my weaknesses, or what he thinks are my weaknesses. What he doesn't know, Owen said, is that you've changed. The Matthew Dudley from 10 years ago, he's gone. This version, he gestured at the tactical precision of their operation. This version is dangerous. At 4:45 a.m., Matthew received a text from an unknown number. I know you visited the hospital. We need to talk. Riverside Towers, Penthouse B, 10 a.m. Come alone, or I start making calls to your partners about your dead wife's miraculous recovery. DS. Matthew showed Owen the text. He moved fast. Probably has someone watching the hospital. Are you going? Of course I'm going. Matthew's smile was predatory. But not alone. Not really. Owen, I need you to do something for me. Something that might cross some legal lines. After what this bastard did, I'll tap dance over those lines. Owen cracked his knuckles. What do you need? I need eyes and ears in that penthouse. I designed the Riverside Towers security system as part of our architectural contract. I know its vulnerabilities. Can you exploit them? Owen's grin was feral. Can a fish swim? Give me until 9 a.m. As dawn broke over the city, Matthew stood at his window, watching the same sunrise that had greeted him for 10 years in this house. But everything had changed. The grief that had defined him, that had been his constant companion, suddenly felt like a lie. And in its place grew something colder, sharper, more focused. Dominic Schaefer had built his empire on the ruins of broken men, on the ashes of stolen lives. He'd counted on Matthew being another victim, another mark to be exploited and discarded. But Matthew Dudley had spent 10 years building himself into something stronger. And now, armed with the truth and the will to act, he was going to show Dominic what happened when you underestimated a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The game had begun. Chapter 4, The Penthouse Predator. Matthew arrived at Riverside Towers at 9:55 a.m., dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that projected confidence and success. In his briefcase, he carried a tablet loaded with architectural schematics and a recording device disguised as a pen. Owen's voice crackled softly in the nearly invisible earpiece tucked in his ear. I'm in their security system, Owen whispered. I can see 3 cameras in the penthouse, living room, kitchen, and office. I'm recording everything. Also, I've got access to the building's environmental controls. If things go south, I can trigger the fire alarm, lock elevators, whatever you need. Matthew pressed the elevator button for the penthouse level. His heart rate was steady, his mind clear. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. The elevator opened directly into Penthouse B, revealing a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Modern art adorned the walls, expensive pieces that screamed new money and bad taste. And standing in the center of it all, holding a glass of bourbon despite the early hour, was Dominic Schaefer. He was tall, handsome in a practiced way, with silver-threaded hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore casual, expensive clothes, designer jeans, a silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The costume of a man who wanted to appear relaxed while maintaining dominance. Matthew Dudley. Dominic's voice was smooth, cultured. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Please sit. Can I get you a drink? No. Matthew remained standing. You wanted to talk. Talk. Dominic's smile widened, but his eyes hardened. Straight to business. I respect that. Though I have to say, you're taking this remarkably well. Most men would be devastated to learn their dead wife has been alive all this time. Most men aren't me. No, clearly not. Dominic gestured to the sofa, and when Matthew still didn't sit, he settled into an armchair himself, clearly annoyed by the power play. Here's the situation, Matthew. Your wife, your supposedly dead wife, has been very foolish. She tried to steal from me, and in the process, she's created a problem for both of us. She's not my wife, Matthew said flatly. She stopped being my wife the moment she chose you. Dominic blinked, surprised. Well, that's refreshingly pragmatic. But the law might see things differently. If it comes out that Leanne Dudley is alive, there will be questions. Insurance fraud investigations. Your firm's reputation would be destroyed by association. Your partnership would evaporate. The press would have a field day. Successful architect's wife faked death in insurance scam. Is this where you ask for money? $500,000. Dominic confirmed. I disappear. Leanne disappears. And your life continues exactly as it is. A small price for your peace of mind. Matthew pulled out his tablet, opened a file, and turned the screen to face Dominic. Linda Decker and her husband Joshua Greenwood. Married 8 years. She faked her death in a boating accident 4 years ago. You took them for $900,000. Joshua paid you another $200,000 over 2 years before he killed himself. Dominic's expression froze. Matthew swiped to the next file. Brittany Morse and William Perry. House fire, 3.5 years ago. You took $650,000 from them. William paid you $150,000 in blackmail before his company went bankrupt from the stress. How did you? Tracy Pollard and Ricky Rodriguez. Car accident. Cheryl Dixon and Hugh Campbell. Drug overdose. Krista Cooley and Felipe Cooley. Her own cousin. You sick bastard. Apartment fire. Matthew's voice remained cold, clinical. 7 couples. 7 deaths faked. Millions of dollars stolen. Multiple lives destroyed. And at the center of it all, you, Dominic. The architect of their misery. Dominic stood slowly, his casual demeanor evaporating. You got into Leanne's laptop. I got into everything. Matthew pocketed his tablet. Police reports, financial records, surveillance footage you kept as insurance. You document everything, Dominic. It's your fatal flaw. You can't resist keeping trophies of your victories. Then you know I have leverage, Dominic said, his voice turning sharp. 1 phone call, and your life ends. Make the call. Matthew pulled out his phone, held it out. Go ahead. Call the police. Tell them Leanne's alive. Tell them about the insurance fraud. Because the moment you do, I release every file you've ever kept to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the country. Your face will be on every screen. Your name will be synonymous with predator. Dominic's face flushed red. You're bluffing. Am I? Matthew's smile was razor thin. I've already lost everything, Dominic. My wife, my innocence, 10 years of my life mourning a ghost. What exactly do you think you can threaten me with? Scandal? Let it come. I'll survive it. But you? A man with your lifestyle, your expenses, your reputation? You won't last a week under federal investigation. The silence stretched between them, electric and dangerous. What do you want? Dominic finally asked. I want you to understand something, Matthew said softly. You picked the wrong man. You thought I'd be like your other victims, weak, desperate, easy to control. But I'm not. And now I have something you need, silence. My silence about your empire of fraud. So here's my counteroffer. You're going to pay me $2 million. Dominic laughed, a harsh bark of sound. You're insane. You've stolen over $5 million in the past 5 years alone. I've tracked every penny. You have offshore accounts, hidden assets. $2 million is nothing. And in exchange, I don't destroy you. Matthew checked his watch. You have 48 hours to get me the money. After that, everything goes public. You can't prove any of this, Dominic said, but his voice wavered. Can't I? Matthew pulled up another file on his tablet. Here's a recording of you and Leanne planning my blackmail. Here are photos of you meeting with Perry Phillips, the forger who created false death certificates. Here are wire transfers to Melvin Myers, the fire inspector you bribed. I have everything, Dominic. Every sin, every crime, every victim. Dominic's hand trembled as he drained his bourbon. If I pay you, how do I know you won't just demand more? Because unlike you, I'm not a parasite. I want compensation for what you stole from me. My peace, my grief, my 10 years. $2 million settles the debt. But if you refuse, if you try to run, if you even think about threatening me again. Matthew leaned closer. I won't just expose you, Dominic. I'll systematically dismantle everything you've built. Your properties will mysteriously fail inspections. Your businesses will face audits. Your victims' families will receive anonymous packages with enough evidence to sue you into oblivion. I'll make it my life's work to ensure you end up in prison or dead. The threat hung in the air, real and tangible. 48 hours, Matthew repeated, then turned toward the elevator. Wait, Dominic called out. What about Leanne? Matthew paused, his hand on the elevator button. Leanne is a loose and you need to tie up yourself. She betrayed you, just like she betrayed me. What you do with her is your problem. I'm done with her. As the elevator doors closed, Matthew caught Dominic's expression, a mixture of rage, fear, and calculation. The man was already planning, already scheming for a way out. Good. That's exactly what Matthew was counting on. Holy shit. Owen breathed in his ear. That was the most badass thing I've ever witnessed. Did you see his face? I saw it, Matthew said. Now comes the hard part. We need to make sure he takes the bait. What bait? Matthew's smile was cold. Dominic Schaefer is a predator. He spent years on top of the food chain. He won't just give me $2 million. He'll try to eliminate the threat, meaning he'll try to kill you. Exactly. And when he does, we'll be ready. Chapter 5. The Setup. Matthew spent the next 24 hours moving like a chess master, positioning pieces across the board while Dominic thought he was playing checkers. Owen tracked every digital footprint Dominic left, phone calls to offshore accounts, encrypted emails to associates, searches for accident contractors, and professional solutions. He's hiring someone. Owen confirmed from his monitoring station in Matthew's office. 3 calls to a number registered to someone named Neil Best. Former military, dishonorable discharge, currently works as a security consultant. Owen made air quotes, which is code for hired muscle. Matthew reviewed the surveillance footage from the penthouse. After he'd left, Dominic had made 7 phone calls, smashed 3 glasses against the wall, and spent an hour typing furiously on his laptop. The man was unraveling, but in a dangerous way, like a cornered animal. We need to control where this happens, Matthew said. I can't have civilians caught in the crossfire. You're seriously going to let him try to kill you? I'm going to let him think he can kill me. Matthew pulled up blueprints for one of his older projects, a warehouse renovation near the industrial district. This property is technically still owned by Morrison & Associates. We kept it after the renovation fell through. It's isolated, has multiple exits, and he pointed to specific areas on the blueprint. Plenty of places for you to set up surveillance. Owen studied the plans. You want to lure him there. I'm going to make it impossible for him to resist. Matthew drafted an email, then showed it to Owen. Dominic, I've reconsidered. $2 million is too much heat for both of us. Let's meet and discuss alternatives. I have the laptop and all backup files with me. We can make a deal that works for everyone. Tonight, 10 p.m., Riverside Industrial Property 7B. Come alone.md. He'll know it's a trap, Owen said. Of course he will. But he'll also think he can turn the trap around. His ego won't let him believe I'm smarter than him. Matthew hit send. Now we prepare. By 6 p.m., the warehouse was ready. Owen had installed cameras in every corner, hidden microphones throughout the space, and set up a command center in the sealed office upstairs. Matthew had arranged the interior like a stage, strategic lighting, clear sight lines, and his own escape routes mapped to the second. I've also tapped into the city's emergency services dispatch, Owen said, adjusting his equipment. If things go really wrong, I can have cops here in 4 minutes. It won't come to that. Matthew checked his watch. But I need you to do something else. Contact every victim on Dominic's list. Anonymous emails with evidence of what happened to them. Give them a choice. They can come forward now, or they can wait for the legal system to contact them after Dominic's arrested. You're building an avalanche, Owen observed. I'm ensuring he has nowhere to run, Matthew corrected. Even if he somehow escapes tonight, his entire network will collapse. His victims will bury him. At 9:45 p.m., Matthew stood in the center of the warehouse, wearing a recording device and a GPS tracker. He'd removed his jacket to show he was unarmed, playing the role of the naive architect who thought he could negotiate with a predator. Movement at the east entrance, Owen reported. Multiple heat signatures. Looks like Dominic brought friends. How many? 3. Dominic and 2 others. Probably Neil Best and an associate. Matthew's pulse quickened, but his expression remained calm. This was the moment everything hinged on. Dominic's next move would determine how the rest of the night unfolded. The door creaked open. Dominic entered first, flanked by 2 large men who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. One of them, presumably Neil Best, had a visible gun tucked into his waistband. Matthew, Dominic called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. I got your email. Very dramatic. Meeting in an abandoned warehouse. Did you learn that from movies? I learned it from needing privacy, Matthew replied. I'm assuming your friends are here for insurance. Just precautions. You understand. Dominic walked closer, hands in his pockets, projecting casual confidence. You said you wanted to discuss alternatives. I'm listening. I want my life back. Matthew said. The life you stole. Leanne stole. I don't want your money. I want my 10 years returned. That's poetic, but impossible. Then I want justice. Matthew pulled out a USB drive from his pocket. This contains everything. Every file, every record, every victim. I was going to release it, destroy you completely. But then I realized something. Revenge doesn't actually fix anything. It won't bring back the man I was. It won't erase what happened. Dominic's eyes fixated on the USB drive. What are you proposing? I give you this. You disappear. You leave the country, leave your victims alone, and never contact me or Leanne again. In exchange, I keep my silence. No police, no FBI, no exposure. You expect me to believe you'd let me walk away? I expect you to understand that I'm tired, Matthew said, injecting false weariness into his voice. I'm tired of carrying this anger. I just want it to end. Dominic stepped closer, and Matthew saw the calculation in his eyes. The man didn't believe a word of it, but he wanted that USB drive, wanted to destroy the evidence that could ruin him. Let me see it, Dominic said, extending his hand. Matthew held the drive just out of reach. Destroy your copies first. All of them. Then you can have this. I don't think so. Dominic's smile turned sharp. He nodded to Neil Best, who pulled his gun. Here's what's actually going to happen, Matthew. You're going to give me that drive and any other copies you've made. Then you're going to have a tragic accident. A fall in this warehouse, perhaps. An architect inspecting a property who met with an unfortunate end. You're going to kill me, Matthew said. Not a question, but a confirmation. I'm going to eliminate a problem, Dominic corrected. You were right about one thing. I am a predator. And predators don't leave threats alive. Even if you kept your word, you'd always be a liability. This way, I eliminate you. Leanne takes the fall for everything, and I disappear with a clean slate. Leanne takes the fall. She's already established as alive. The police know about the car accident. When they find evidence of your murder in her hospital room, some conveniently planted items, perhaps a confession note, it wraps up nicely. Vengeful wife kills the husband who rebuilt his life after her death. Very tragic. Matthew felt a chill that had nothing to do with the warehouse's temperature. Dominic wasn't just willing to kill, he'd planned it meticulously. You're getting all this, Owen? Matthew said quietly. Dominic froze. What? My friend Owen. He's been listening to every word. Recording everything. Those cameras you didn't think to look for? They're capturing this entire conversation in 4K. Matthew's expression hardened. You just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder. Neil Best swung his gun toward the shadows, searching for Owen's location. The second man pulled his own weapon. It doesn't matter, Dominic snarled. Even if you're recording this, you'll be dead. Your friend will be dead. And I'll still disappear. Will you? Matthew's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then smiled. Because right now, the evidence we compiled is being received by 7 different law enforcement agencies, including the FBI field office in this city. The emails Owen sent to your victims? They went out 20 minutes ago. By morning, you'll have lawsuits, criminal investigations, and media attention from coast to coast. You're bluffing. The way you were bluffing about letting me live? Matthew shook his head. No, Dominic. This was never about negotiation. This was about getting you to confess on camera, to threaten me in front of witnesses. Now you have 2 choices, surrender or run. But either way, your empire ends tonight. Dominic's face purpled with rage. Kill him, he ordered Neil Best. Kill him now. Neil raised his gun, finger tightening on the trigger. And that's when the warehouse lights exploded with brightness, accompanied by the deafening sound of sirens. Police, drop your weapons. Get on the ground. Chapter 6, The Collapse. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Neil Best's gun discharged, the bullet going wide as he spun toward the sudden flood of officers pouring through every entrance. Matthew dove behind a steel support beam, his heart hammering as glass shattered and voices shouted commands. Owen's voice crackled urgently in his ear. Matthew, get to the northeast exit. Now. Matthew ran, ducking low as more gunshots rang out. Behind him, he heard Dominic screaming orders, Neil cursing, and the heavy footfalls of officers in tactical gear. He reached the exit door Owen had marked on the blueprints, slipped through, and found himself in an alley where Owen waited in his car. Get in. Matthew barely closed the door before Owen gunned the engine, peeling away from the warehouse as police lights painted the night red and blue. What the hell happened? Matthew gasped. That wasn't the plan. Emergency dispatch picked up on a 911 call reporting shots fired. Owen explained, navigating through side streets. Someone must have heard the first shot and panicked. I couldn't call them off without blowing our cover. But honestly, this might work better. Better? Best almost shot me. But he didn't. And now Dominic's been caught by police, on scene, with armed associates who discharged weapons. The recording we have of his confession? That's evidence in a criminal case now. Matthew, we just handed the prosecutors a gift-wrapped conviction. Matthew slumped in his seat, adrenaline slowly draining from his system. The victims. Did they respond to the emails? Owen pulled out his phone, scrolled through messages. 4 of them have already hired lawyers. 2 contacted the FBI directly. Joshua Greenwood's mother is threatening to sue Dominic's estate for wrongful death. And get this, Tracy Pollard? She's apparently been living under the radar, terrified of Dominic for 3 years. She's offering to testify against him in exchange for immunity. That's it then. He's done. Almost done. Owen glanced at Matthew. There's still one loose end. Leanne. Matthew had been deliberately not thinking about Leanne, compartmentalizing that particular complication. What about her? She's still in the hospital, still recovering. And once the police start digging into Dominic's past, they're going to find out about her involvement. She's facing serious charges: Matthew, fraud, conspiracy, potentially accessory to murder if Dominic's plan against you is factored in. I know. So what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did you do with the ghost of your dead wife, the woman who destroyed your life and then tried to destroy it again? Matthew pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, and found a number he'd been avoiding. I'm going to make a call. The next morning, Matthew sat in a conference room at the FBI field office, across from Special Agent Milton Bauer. The agent was in his 50s, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen every lie, every con, every variation of human deception. Mr. Dudley, Agent Bauer said, reviewing the stack of evidence Owen had compiled. I have to say, this is one of the more comprehensive civilian investigations I've seen. Almost disturbingly comprehensive. I'm an architect, Matthew said calmly. I'm trained to see systems, structures, weak points. Dominic Schaefer built his operation like a house of cards. I just found the right card to pull. And your wife, Leanne Dudley. You're saying she was coerced into participating. This was the moment Matthew had anticipated, the choice that would define what kind of man he'd become. He could condemn Leanne, watch her go to prison, claim justice. Or he could do something else. Leanne was young when she met Dominic, Matthew said carefully. 28 years old, naive, working a job she hated. Dominic is a professional manipulator. He identified her vulnerabilities and exploited them. Yes, she made terrible choices. Yes, she hurt me profoundly. But after 10 years living under his control, watching him destroy other people, she tried to stop it. She stole his evidence, tried to run. That's what led to the car accident. Agent Bauer studied him. You're asking me to consider her a victim rather than a perpetrator. I'm asking you to see the complexity. Dominic Schaefer has destroyed multiple lives. Leanne is one of them. She deserves consequences for her actions, but she also deserves a chance to help bring him down. The agent tapped his pen against the file. If she cooperates, testifies against Schaefer, provides evidence we couldn't otherwise access, the DA might consider a plea deal. Reduced charges, possibly probation instead of prison time. That's all I'm asking. Mr. Dudley, can I be blunt? Please. Most men in your position would want revenge. They want to see their wife suffer for what she did. Why are you helping her? Matthew was quiet for a long moment, searching for the truth in the tangle of his emotions. Because I've learned something over the past 10 years, Agent Bauer. Carrying hate is exhausting. It doesn't change the past, and it doesn't build a future. Leanne betrayed me, but she also gave me a gift. She forced me to rebuild myself into someone stronger. The man I was before would have been destroyed by this. The man I am now? I survived. He stood, preparing to leave. Besides, the best revenge isn't watching your enemies suffer. It's thriving despite them. I have a good life, a successful career, friends I trust. Dominic is going to prison for decades. Leanne will have to live with her choices. And me? I get to walk away and keep building. Agent Bauer stood as well, extending his hand. You're a good man, Mr. Dudley. Or maybe just a smart one. Either way, we'll be in touch about your testimony for the trial. 3 days later, the media exploded with the story. Fraud ring preyed on married couples, screamed the headlines. Dominic's face was plastered across news sites, television screens, and social media. The details were salacious: fake deaths, insurance scams, multiple victims across several states. Matthew's name appeared briefly as an architect who helped expose the scheme, but he declined all interview requests. Owen kept him updated on the fallout. Neil Best had turned informant to reduce his charges, providing evidence of 3 additional cases Dominic had committed. Perry Phillips, the forger, was arrested in Mexico trying to flee. Every property Dominic owned was seized by federal authorities. And in the hospital, Leanne recovered under police guard, preparing to give testimony that would seal Dominic's fate. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. 6 months later, Matthew sat in a federal courtroom as the trial of Dominic Schaefer entered its final week. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case: fraud, conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, attempted murder. 37 separate charges spanning 5 years and 7 proven victims. Matthew had already testified, spending 2 days on the stand recounting the night in the warehouse, the confession Dominic had made, the threats against his life. The jury had listened with rapt attention, and Matthew had seen the moment their sympathy turned to outright disgust for the defendant. Now it was Leanne's turn. She looked different than she had in the hospital. Healthier, but diminished. The confidence she'd once carried had evaporated, replaced by something fragile and uncertain. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup, the costume of a penitent. Matthew watched from the gallery as she took the oath, settled into the witness chair, and met the prosecutor's gaze. "Ms. Dudley," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you met Dominic Schaefer." For the next 3 hours, Leanne told her story. The courtship, the manipulation, the gradual convincing that faking her death was the only way to escape her mundane life. She described how Dominic had made her feel special, chosen, while systematically isolating her from friends and family. How he'd promised her freedom and instead delivered control. He kept files on everything, Leanne testified, her voice shaking. Every conversation, every transaction, every moment of our lives. He said it was for protection, but I realized it was insurance. If I ever tried to leave, he'd destroy me. He had evidence that would make me look like the mastermind instead of him. "What changed?" the prosecutor asked. "What made you decide to come forward?" "Matthew." Leanne's eyes found him in the gallery. "I found out Dominic was planning to target him, to blackmail him, or if that didn't work, her voice broke, to kill him. And I realized I'd already destroyed Matthew once. I couldn't let Dominic do it again." The defense attorney, a slick operator named Spencer Rush, tried to shake her testimony on cross-examination. "Ms. Dudley, isn't it true that you willingly participated in insurance fraud? That you actively helped drain your joint accounts? That you spent years living off stolen money?" "Yes," Leanne admitted. "All of that is true. I made terrible choices. But I was also terrified. Dominic threatened me, controlled me, isolated me from anyone who might help. I'm not claiming I'm innocent, Mr. Rush. I'm saying I was also a victim. A victim who lived in luxury for 10 years. A victim who lived in a cage decorated with luxury," Leanne countered. "There's a difference." Spencer Rush pressed harder. "You expect this jury to believe you had no choice? That you couldn't have walked away at any point?" "I tried to walk away." Leanne's composure cracked. "That's why I stole his laptop, why I ran. And look what happened. He chased me, caused an accident that nearly killed me, then abandoned me at the hospital. That's what Dominic Schaefer does to people who try to escape." Matthew watched the jury. They were conflicted, sympathetic to Leanne's situation, but also aware of her complicity. It was the reaction he'd expected, the reason he'd advocated for her cooperation rather than her complete condemnation. When Leanne's testimony concluded, she was led from the courtroom. As she passed Matthew's row, their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no love there anymore, no remnant of the connection they'd once shared. But there was acknowledgement, 2 people who'd survived something terrible and had to find a way forward. The trial lasted another week. The prosecution brought in victim after victim, each telling stories of devastation and loss. Hugh Campbell's brother described how Hugh had become a shell of himself, drinking heavily, unable to trust anyone. Ricky Rodriguez's mother wept as she explained how her son had lost his business, his reputation, his will to live after Tracy Pollard's death. And when Joshua Greenwood's mother took the stand, the entire courtroom fell silent. She described her son's suicide note, which blamed himself for not seeing through Linda Decker's scheme. She talked about the closed casket at his funeral, the way Dominic's blackmail had driven her son to despair. He was a good man, she said, tears streaming down her face. A trusting, loving man. And that monster, she pointed at Dominic, he preyed on that goodness. He destroyed my son as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. Dominic's defense tried to claim he was merely a businessman who'd made poor choices, that the women in these schemes were the true masterminds. But the mountain of evidence, the files he'd kept, the surveillance footage, the recordings, the testimony of his former associates, painted a different picture. This was a man who'd built an empire on suffering, who'd refined cruelty into a business model. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the verdict was read, guilty. On all counts. Dominic's face remained emotionless, but Matthew saw the way his hands trembled, the way his lawyer had to steady him as the charges were listed one by one. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman named Constance Allison, reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, the victim impact statements, and the recommendations from both sides. Mr. Schaefer, Judge Allison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom, I have presided over many cases in my career. I have seen violence, greed, and calculated cruelty. But rarely have I seen someone so thoroughly corrupt, so completely devoid of empathy or remorse. You didn't just steal money. You stole lives. You stole futures. You stole the very ability of your victims to trust again. She listed the sentences: 15 years for fraud, 10 years for conspiracy, 8 years for extortion, running consecutively. With additional charges factored in, Dominic Schaefer was sentenced to 42 years in federal prison. You will be an old man when you're released, Judge Allison concluded. If you're released at all. And every day of those 42 years, I want you to think about Joshua Greenwood, about the man who killed himself because of your schemes. That death is on your conscience, Mr. Schaefer, though I suspect you lack one. As Dominic was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at the gallery one last time. His eyes found Matthew, and for a moment, pure hatred blazed there. Matthew met his gaze evenly, unflinching. Then he smiled, not with cruelty, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd beaten a monster at his own game. Dominic looked away first. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. 3 months after Dominic's sentencing, Matthew received a letter. It was delivered to his office at Morrison & Associates, where he'd just finished presenting designs for a new community center that would bear his name, the Dudley Family Resilience Center, funded by a portion of the victim's restitution from Dominic's seized assets. The envelope had no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten. Matthew, I know I have no right to contact you. I know everything I could say sounds hollow after what I did. But I wanted you to know that I'll be entering a plea agreement next week. 5 years probation, mandatory community service, and restitution payments to the victim's fund. It's more mercy than I deserve. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that seeing you in that courtroom, seeing what you became despite everything I did to destroy you, changed something in me. You showed me what strength looks like, what integrity looks like. I'm going to therapy now, trying to understand how I became someone capable of what I did, trying to figure out if there's anything redeemable left inside me. Maybe there isn't. Maybe I'm too broken. But if I ever do become someone worth being, it'll be because you showed me it was possible. I'm sorry, Matthew, for everything, for the man you were, the years you lost, the trust one betrayed. I'm sorry, Leanne. Matthew read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just a quiet sense of closure, like the final piece of an architectural puzzle clicking into place. Owen knocked on his office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look contemplative. Good contemplative or bad contemplative? Neither. Just finished. Matthew accepted the coffee. Leanne's taking a plea deal. 5 years probation. How do you feel about that? I think justice isn't always about punishment, Matthew said. Sometimes it's about people facing the consequences of their choices and trying to do better. If Leanne uses her probation to actually change, to help other victims, then maybe something good comes from all of this. That's very zen of you. Matthew laughed. Or maybe I'm just exhausted from carrying anger for the past 6 months. Let someone else carry it for a while. Owen settled into a chair, sipping his coffee. So what now? You've brought down a criminal empire, saved multiple victims, rebuilt your reputation, and become something of a local hero. What does Matthew Dudley do for an encore? I build things, Matthew said simply. That's what I've always done. Architecture is about creating structures that last, that serve purposes, that make people's lives better. I lost track of that for a while, when I was grieving. But now I remember. He pulled up designs on his computer, not just the community center, but plans for an entire initiative. I've been working with the victims' families. We're creating a foundation dedicated to helping people rebuild after fraud schemes. Financial counseling, legal assistance, mental health services. We're calling it the Phoenix Coalition, Rising from the Ashes. Owen studied the plans, impressed. You're turning your pain into purpose. Someone has to. Matthew saved the file. Dominic destroyed lives because he was empty inside, because causing suffering gave him a sense of power. I want to prove that building is more powerful than destroying. That creation matters more than corruption. His phone buzzed, a text from Miranda Williams, one of the FBI agents who'd worked on the case. Thought you'd want to know? We just arrested 2 of Dominic's overseas associates. The investigation keeps expanding. Your evidence opened up a whole network we didn't know existed. Matthew showed Owen the message. It's not over. Not really. Dominic was just one piece of a larger pattern. But at least now people are paying attention. They're looking for these schemes, protecting potential victims. Does it feel like enough? Owen asked. After everything? Matthew considered the question. 6 months ago, when he'd walked into that hospital room and seen Leanne alive, his entire world had shattered. He'd been forced to confront the fact that his grief, his rebuilding, his entire post-Leanne life had been based on a lie. But instead of destroying him again, it had revealed something he hadn't known about himself: resilience. The ability to take the worst possible scenario and not just survive it, but use it as fuel for something better. It's enough, Matthew said finally. Not because Dominic's in prison or because justice was served, but because I know who I am now. I know what I'm capable of. And that knowledge is worth more than revenge ever could be. Owen raised his coffee cup in a toast. To Matthew Dudley, architect, detective, and apparently philosophical badass. Matthew clinked his cup against Owen's. I'll take it. That evening, Matthew drove to a cemetery on the outskirts of town. He'd been avoiding this place for 6 months, not sure how to reconcile the grave that existed with the woman who didn't. Leanne's headstone was simple: Leanne Marie Dudley, beloved wife, 1985 to 2015, forever in our hearts. Except she wasn't dead. The grave was empty, the memorial false. But the grief he'd experienced here had been real. The man he'd become because of this place was real. Matthew knelt beside the headstone, running his fingers over the carved letters. I don't know if you can hear me, he said quietly. I don't even know who I'm talking to, the woman you were, or the ghost I created. But I wanted to say something. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A cool breeze rustled through the trees. Thank you, Matthew continued. Not for leaving me, not for the pain, but for teaching me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive the impossible. That grief doesn't have to define me. I get to define myself. He pulled out a small object from his pocket, the wedding ring he'd worn for 10 years after her death. He'd finally removed it 3 months ago, after Dominic's conviction. Now he placed it gently at the base of the headstone. I'm letting you go, he said. The real you, the memory of you, the ghost of what we were. All of it. I'm choosing to move forward without carrying you anymore. As he stood to leave, he felt lighter. Not happy. He wasn't sure he'd ever be truly happy again, in the simple, uncomplicated way he'd been before. But content. At peace with the scars he carried, the strength he'd earned. Matthew Dudley walked out of the cemetery as the last light faded from the sky, leaving behind the empty grave and the full life he'd built despite it. Chapter 9. The Future. 1 year later, Matthew stood in front of the Phoenix Coalition headquarters, a renovated building in the heart of downtown that now served as a hub for fraud victims and their families. The grand opening had drawn significant press attention, but Matthew had declined to speak to reporters. This wasn't about him. Inside, the space was warm and welcoming, a deliberate contrast to the cold, institutional feel of police stations and courtrooms where many victims had to tell their stories. There were private counseling rooms, legal consultation offices, and a community space where support groups met. Owen appeared beside him, looking proud. 300 victims helped in the first 6 months. 2 similar fraud rings exposed using your model. Matthew, you've created something incredible. We created something incredible, Matthew corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. True, but you're the face of it. The man who turned his tragedy into triumph. People connect with that story. Matthew watched through the windows as a support group gathered in the community space. He recognized one of the participants, Ricky Rodriguez, who'd spent the past year rebuilding his business and his trust in people. Rodriguez caught Matthew's eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. You know what the best part is? Owen said. Dominic's locked up, and his entire legacy is this, a building dedicated to undoing everything he did. Every life he ruined is being rebuilt. Every dollar he stole is being repaid. He thought he was building an empire, but all he really did was inspire something better. Matthew's phone buzzed. A text from Agent Milton Bauer. New case just came across my desk. Pattern matches Dominic's MO. Could use your insight. Interested? Matthew showed Owen the message. They want me to consult on similar cases. Are you going to? Matthew thought about it. He had a good life now, better than good. His career was thriving, the coalition was growing, and he'd even started dating someone, a landscape architect named Celia Hewitt who understood that he came with baggage but didn't let it define him. But he also knew what it felt like to be on the other side of someone like Dominic. To have your life dismantled by a predator who counted on you being too broken to fight back. Yeah, Matthew said, typing a response to Agent Bauer. I'm interested. 6 months after that, Matthew was called to testify before a Senate committee investigating fraud schemes targeting vulnerable populations. He'd become something of an expert, having helped the FBI identify 3 separate criminal networks using variations of Dominic's methods. Senator Edgar Flowers chaired the committee, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense investigations. Mr. Dudley, he began, you've reviewed over 50 cases of spouse-targeted fraud schemes in the past year. What patterns have you identified? Matthew had prepared extensively for this testimony, working with Owen to compile data and analysis. Senator, these schemes rely on 3 key factors: isolation, manipulation, and time. The perpetrators isolate their targets from support networks, manipulate them emotionally and financially, and use time to create dependency. The longer the scheme runs, the harder it is for victims to escape. He clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing the network diagram he'd created. But they also rely on something else, shame. Victims feel ashamed for being fooled, for trusting the wrong person, for not seeing the signs. That shame keeps them silent, which protects the perpetrators. Senator Flowers leaned forward. What's your recommendation for preventing these schemes? Education and support, Matthew said firmly. We need public awareness campaigns about common fraud tactics. We need better protections for victims who come forward. And we need to remove the stigma. Being victimized by a sophisticated con artist isn't a moral failing. It's a crime committed against you. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Matthew answered every question with precision, backed by data and real cases. When it concluded, multiple senators approached him privately, asking for additional information, expressing interest in drafting new legislation. On the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. Matthew had learned to handle the press better now, understanding they weren't the enemy. They were a tool for spreading awareness. Mr. Dudley, you've become known as an advocate for fraud victims, one reporter called out. Some people call you a hero. How does that feel? Matthew smiled wryly. I'm not a hero. I'm someone who got angry enough to do something about a problem. Anyone in my position would have done the same. But they didn't, another reporter countered. You did. What drives you? Matthew paused, considering his answer. I spent 10 years grieving someone who wasn't dead. 10 years carrying pain that was based on a lie. When I discovered the truth, I had 2 choices. Let that pain destroy me, or use it to prevent others from experiencing the same thing. I chose prevention. I chose purpose. What would you say to Dominic Schaefer if you could speak to him now? The question caught Matthew off guard. He hadn't thought about Dominic directly in months, though the man's crimes remained central to his work. "I'd say thank you," Matthew answered, surprising himself with the honesty. "Because in trying to destroy me, he showed me what I'm capable of. He showed me that I'm stronger than I knew. And he gave me a mission, to ensure that men like him face consequences, and people like his victims find support." He descended the steps, Owen waiting with the car. As they drove away, Owen said, "You really would thank him?" "In a way." Matthew watched the city pass by outside the window. "He broke me, but I rebuilt myself better. He took everything, but I created something more valuable. And now he's spending the rest of his life in a cell, while I'm out here making a difference." "That's cold, man." "That's justice," Matthew corrected. "Not the kind that comes from a courtroom verdict. The kind that comes from living well despite those who try to make you live badly." Late that night, Matthew returned to his house, the same house he'd bought after Leanne's death, but transformed into something new. Celia was waiting, having prepared dinner and lit candles on the back patio. "How was Washington?" she asked, pouring wine. "Exhausting. Productive. I think we might actually get some new legislation passed." Matthew accepted the glass, clinking it against hers. "Thank you for this. For being patient with the crazy schedule." "Are you kidding? What you're doing is incredible. I'm proud of you." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the city at night. Eventually, Celia said, "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Not walking away when you had the chance? You could have just let the FBI handle Dominic, could have moved on with your life quietly. Instead, you dove in head first, made yourself a target, risked everything. Do you ever wish you'd chosen differently?" Matthew considered the question seriously. There had been moments of doubt, times when the weight of what he'd taken on felt crushing. But those moments passed, replaced by something stronger. "No," he said finally. "Because if I'd walked away, I'd still be carrying Leanne's ghost. I'd still be the man defined by his grief. All of this, forced me to become someone new. Someone I actually like being." "I like who you are too," Celia said softly. Later, as Matthew prepared for bed, he passed by his home office. The letter from Leanne sat in the desk drawer, untouched since the day he'd received it. He'd heard through the grapevine that she'd completed her probation successfully, was working with victims' advocacy groups, trying to make amends. Good for her. Genuinely, good for her. But she wasn't his story anymore. She was a chapter that had ended, a scar that had healed, a lesson learned. Matthew Dudley's story was still being written, in the lives he helped, the policies he influenced, the future he was building. Not despite what had happened to him, but because of it. And that, he thought, was the best revenge of all. Epilogue. 5 years after Dominic's conviction, Matthew received one final letter. This one came from the federal penitentiary where Dominic was serving his sentence. "Dudley, I know you won't read this. I know you probably throw away any communication from me unopened, but I needed to write it anyway. They tell me you've helped bring down 12 networks like mine, that you've saved hundreds of people from experiencing what my victims went through. They tell me you've become some kind of crusader. I want you to know that I hate you for that. I hate that you took my destruction and turned it into construction. I hate that you're out there being celebrated while I rot in here. But I also understand, finally, what you tried to tell me that night in the warehouse. You said predators don't survive when their prey fights back. You were right. I built my life on broken people, and the moment one of them refused to stay broken, everything collapsed. You broke me, Matthew, more thoroughly than I ever broke anyone. And the worst part? You did it legally, ethically. You didn't lower yourself to my level. You stayed above it and buried me from there. I have 37 more years in this place. 37 years to think about what I did, who I hurt, what I destroyed. Some people think that's too harsh. I think it's not harsh enough. I destroyed lives for profit and pleasure. You rebuilt them for purpose. That's the difference between us. I hope you never think of me again. I hope you're too busy living your life, too focused on your mission, to spare even a moment for the man who tried to destroy you. Because that would be the ultimate defeat, me spending decades obsessing over you while you forget I exist. D.S. Matthew did read the letter. He read it twice. Then he filed it away with the evidence he'd gathered, another piece of documentation in the case that had changed his life. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. That evening, at the annual Phoenix Coalition Gala, Matthew gave a speech to a room full of donors, victims, advocates, and friends. He talked about resilience, about transformation, about the power of choosing purpose over pain. We don't always get to choose what happens to us, he concluded, but we always get to choose what we do with it. Every person in this room has taken something terrible and used it as fuel for something better. That's not just surviving. That's transcending. The applause was thunderous. Owen stood in the back, tears in his eyes. Celia sat in the front row, beaming. Around the room, faces of people Matthew had helped over the years smiled back at him. And somewhere, in a federal prison, Dominic Schaefer sat in a cell, alone with his thoughts, defeated by the man he'd tried to destroy. Matthew Dudley left the stage, walked into his future, and never looked back. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.